Mini episode 1440 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
In looking at what would transpire subsequent to that, Johnny, you've got on the early end of Act 3, of course, there was the everything with Deflategate and the scandal that came out of that after the Colts did a little dry snitch to the NFL about the pressure and the footballs. And from there, it just seemed like, yes, there were championships in the years that came. But again, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would rate this maybe a 3 in terms of the last dance type thing here. If you look at the last year or two of the Bulls, maybe only about a third of that there. But between Brady and Belichick, with the fact that Brady was having to take well below market value to keep those teams together year after year. And quite frankly, when you look at it, that the front office that Belichick oversaw has not done an excellent job in terms of drafting. That's why they had to go out and do the big free agency spree they did last season to try and beef up that roster a little bit more. So Brady's probably looking around going, I'm taking, pay reductions for what? As he's seeing what's on the roster there, and eventually saw greener pastures in Tampa Bay. But there was a fraying between him and Belichick over a period of time. Steve referenced the Jimmy G stuff, and some of this was probably inevitable with two headstrong guys like this. It seems to me, Johnny, that Brady sublimated himself to Belichick for as long as he could, and then I think he kind of decided he wanted to write the last act on his own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a lot of ground to cover, obviously, from 2014 on. I would just say Brady consistently took pay cuts going back as long.
Yep.
I mean, going back even before he met Giselle, who brings in a lot of money in that household as well.
Yes.
So he does have that to fall on, but he took pay cuts even before meeting her. And I think one thing, while he took pay cuts, Belichick, as you sort of alluded to, didn't necessarily use those pay cuts to bolster the offensive skill players around him. I mean, Belichick has a pretty poor history of drafting receivers. He did draft Rob Gronkowski, which is, one of the probably best second-round draft picks ever. I think he fell to the second round because of injury concerns, which played out, but obviously was well worth the pick.
Aaron Hernandez, too.
That's true. That one didn't really play out quite as well. But with, after Gronkowski, you have guys like Julian Edelman, Danny Amendola, Malcolm Mitchell for a year, Brandon Cooks playing for a year or two. He takes these pay cuts, but I'd say Belichick always consistently put Brady in the best position to win championships, which ultimately is the goal. I don't think he necessarily put Brady in the best position to have great statistical numbers, even though he also accomplished that as well. When I look at those last few years, and maybe we'll talk about Tampa in a bit, I think of that 2016 Super Bowl when they come back from 28-3, and the greatest comeback in NFL history, maybe arguably the greatest comeback in sports history. Maybe Red Sox down 3-0 to the Yankees would also be in the conversation. I'm sure you guys would think of a few others as well. One of the fascinating things about that game, and, they did for NFL 100, they had the 100 greatest players. Brady was brought into studio for an interview, I believe, on NFL Network. They talked about, for 40 minutes, Brady's entire career, and this was just after he won his 6th Super Bowl, so before he went to Tampa, but after his 6th Super Bowl. They didn't even mention the 28-3 comeback one time. And that just speaks to how dominant this guy's career was. You don't even mention the 28-3 comeback in the Super Bowl. Obviously, that's if you have to pick one ultimate highlight, but it just shows you how deep his career was any other quarterback, that would be first and foremost the most impressive sort of item on his resume. But Brady was always the ultimate fighter. All of those Super Bowl comebacks, you do have to give the defense credit, right? Against the Seahawks, they didn't allow a point in the fourth quarter. Against the Falcons, they didn't allow a point for the last quarter and a half. You can partially thank Pete Carroll and Kyle Shanahan for those two facts,
Right.
but the defense played huge plays when they had to. And Brady he's the ultimate, even when things just don't go well. You know, against the Seahawks, he had thrown 2 interceptions in the first 3 quarters. Against the Falcons, he throws a pick six. They're down 28-3. This last game against the Rams, they're down 27-3. Unlike Rodgers, Manning, and some of these other guys, he just has the ability, and maybe it's the mental toughness he's developed over time, to just keep fighting and keep clawing. And once he finds that opening, the rest is history. That's why he's, when he was in New England, 6 Super Bowls, 6 fourth quarter game-winning drives. Against Atlanta, I think he had 4 of those drives were necessary, and then in overtime. And then I would just say, thinking about the Mahomes comparison, Brady's won 3 overtime coin tosses in the playoffs. They went down and scored all 3 times, including at Arrowhead, which is one of the signature wins of his career in the 2018 AFC Championship game, where he's literally throwing the ball to just Julian Edelman and a broken down Rob Gronkowski. In overtime of that game, they convert 3 3rd and 10s. Why the Chiefs weren't guarding Julian Edelman up the middle, I have no idea. But they convert 3 3rd and 10s, Edelman, and Gronk. And they end up winning that game in about as difficult of an environment as there is in the NFL. So you give Brady that opening, he's going to take it 110% of the time.
That's true. Those are all very good points. But by the way, it is obligatory for somebody as petty as me, and I always like to joke about this. If there was a country song to be written about me, it would be called "I Ain't Drive NASCAR, but you can call me Richard Petty." So in that vein, I have to say, in terms of the comebacks you mentioned, don't let any of these other historic sports comebacks distract you from the fact that the Warriors blew a 3-1 lead. I got to get that in there. But as far as it goes with Brady's career, Steve, that these years, the final years there in New England, once there was really, and again, there was nothing to prove after the 3 Super Bowls early in the career. Those sort of cement you at a certain level. But as he starts chasing the greatest of all time, and then I think cementing it even before he leaves for Tampa Bay, you started to get a little bit more of the behind-the-scenes stuff coming out between him and Belichick. And like I said, it's nowhere near the level of The Last Dance in Chicago, but it is one of these things where had him and Belichick been exactly on the same page, there's a very good chance he would have retired in New England.
Well, I think that's right, but they weren't, clearly. But I want to go back to Deflategate because I think it's one of the worst raps of all time. And I still have a message on my cell phone the day that they announced that Tom Brady was going to get 4 games and all the other, $1 million fine or whatever all the other stuff was for the rest. And Johnny called me up and left a message that I couldn't even play now on the air because it would need too many bleeps. And but the last part was, I hope they win the Super Bowl next year and they boo Roger Goodell off the stage. And, he didn't play the first 4 games. If anything, I thought that helped refresh him as almost having a short season. Was unconscious in the playoffs. Johnny and I went to that Atlanta Super Bowl down in Houston. Right, Johnny? It was in Houston, I think.
Yep.
You'll love this one, Rick. You actually have to walk by the Astrodome to go to where it's still there, the Astrodome.
Right.
And you have to walk by it to go to the stadium in Houston. But the joke of the Deflategate game to me was, and I know Johnny will know the exact, the second half, the Patriots won like 38-7 or something when they fixed the balls at halftime, the alleged balls that were too deflated. So if anything, to me, that was an entire joke. To give him 4 games, as Johnny said at the time, they're giving rapists and, wife batterers 2 games. That was right around the Ray Rice fiasco. And we were part of the booing him off the stage. You couldn't hear a word Roger Goodell said after the Patriots won that game. And I thought he was eating a lot of crow. But that started, again, just another tough it out. What were they? I think they were like 11-1 when Brady came back. It was just incredible the whole season. And, he was on a mission. This was another chip on my shoulder. This wasn't just I'm a sixth-round draft pick. I don't have the incredible physical speed. I can't really run. This was even tougher. And I think for the last three, frankly, to go through the last three, it was as much about his mental toughness and his mental ability to walk up to the line of scrimmage and kind of know what was going to happen before it happened. It was just incredible. And I'll even throw one in for although Joe Stazak, I don't know if he'd agree with me or not, he knows they got away with one. The reason they won that Super Bowl, the Eagles won that Super Bowl, Corey Clement caught a catch in the end zone. He bobbled the ball, and somehow Gene Starator, who's now the expert on TV, said, yeah, that was okay. It was okay to bobble. And I'll never forget, Boomer Esiason said, yeah, they changed the rules for the catch in the playoffs because there's no chance that was a catch all during the season. And I'm not saying they would have won if that was ruled an incomplete pass, but they very well might have won. So the other interesting thing to me is when you look at the history of all of these Super Bowls that Brady was in, he really could have lost a few that he won, and he really could have won a few that he lost. I mean, Malcolm Butler made one of the greatest plays of all time, and then 2 years later, he's sitting on the bench. He can't get into the Super Bowl when they're just torching everybody who took his place. And to this day, it hasn't really been explained. I remember writing an article, did Bill Belichick lose that Super Bowl before the game started by benching Malcolm Butler? And if he was making a point, he should have woke up at halftime, because I think if Malcolm Butler had played the second half alone, they would have won that Super Bowl. So it was some crazy stuff where they easily could have won more, although, again, in my view, they were kind of fortunate to beat Seattle. Atlanta, as great as that comeback was, Julio Jones made one of the greatest catches I ever saw. 1st and 10 on the Patriots 22 with like 5 minutes to go. If they take 3 knees and let Mac Bryant kick a 39 or 40-yard field goal, I think they're up 11, I think, with like 4 minutes left. It's a totally different game. So you do need some contributions from the other side sometimes. And as Johnny said before, Pete Carroll and he contributed, and Kyle Shanahan contributed in the Atlanta game. But these are some incredible plays. But he usually comes out almost always on top. Yes, he's 7-3. That's why I thought the biggest game was the one against the Chiefs, because again, if Mahomes wins, he's got 2. Brady not only has 6, but he's 6-4. And 6-4 is not nearly as good as 7-3. You can still make the arguments that go, one more loss, he would have been 500 in the Super Bowl, even though he played in 10. But I think so much was because of mental toughness and the mental knowledge. Again, his stats in his 40s are significantly better than his stats in his 20s, which again is unfathomable to most people, including Bill Belichick, until it happened.
I'm just thinking that the Super Bowl against Atlanta, there was almost a running storyline in Patriot circles where from about 2011 to 15, if Rob Gronkowski was healthy in a playoff game, the Patriots were going to win. And you can trace back Gronk either missed games or just wasn't healthy. Mm-hmm. And New England had a hard time moving the ball without him.
Right.
But in the 2016 season, where Brady goes 11-1 in the regular season after the Deflategate suspension, Gronk actually gets hurt midway through, so he's coming back from 28-3. And once again, these guys are all good football players, but he's coming back from 28-3, throwing the ball to Julian Edelman, Danny Amendola, Malcolm Mitchell, who was a rookie player who never played another snap of football after that game, Chris Hogan, James White. And these guys are tough football players, but that's who he came back in the Super Bowl from 28-3 with. And just the last point I'll mention, and Rick, I'm sorry to bring back some probably pretty bad memories going back a few years. But we talk about, John Elway and the drive and these other sort of historic moments, or Montana and the catch. Brady in that Super Bowl, down 28-20, goes on a 2-yard touchdown drive to tie the game. They convert the 2 points to send the game into overtime, and then he goes on a 75-yard touchdown drive where everybody in the stadium and watching at home knew that he would do that. So he's done so many of these. And I know it wasn't 98 yards, but it was, 92 down 8, needing a 2-point conversion in the Super Bowl. He's done so many of these drives, if you will. You almost can't have a name for them because he's accomplished so many of them. It's really incredible.
That is true. A couple points about things that you guys said. First of all, on the drive here again, I'll be petty again on that, and that is I always wonder why nobody outside of America's North Coast ever noticed that Rich Karlas's quote-unquote game-winning kick was not, in fact, a game-winning kick. Check the tape. You'll see what I'm seeing. I don't know how the rest of America missed that, but people in Cleveland saw it, I assure you. And as far as you guys have referenced the 2 Super Bowls in Houston that the Patriots won, and I got to tell you, on the second one, I got to think, Dan Quinn and Kyle Shanahan, just knowing what kind of a beating they were going to be taking after that game. They could have used something to take the heat off of them, and they could have been forgiven for sitting there thinking in the locker room, thinking, why couldn't this have been the Super Bowl where Justin Timberlake exposed Janet Jackson's nipple? That was the previous one in Houston. If that had happened today, people be calling the FCC and everything like that, and people might forget about 28-3 a little more readily. But alas, that happened in that classic game against Carolina that Johnnie referenced earlier. So basically, if you will, the coda, the epilogue to Brady's career, although I don't know if you would necessarily call it that because there was one more championship, but the sojourn in Tampa, going down there and playing under Bruce Arians for 2 years, and of course all the Chouds feeling so betrayed when it happened, which, again, on America's North Coast, we like to drink Choud tears, so that was something that was very enjoyable to me personally, just to see them whining about him, the same Southies who were singing his praises. But, I think in looking at this, I'll start with you, Johnnie, that, the last part of it here, the immediate kind of success, reminiscent to me, it was very, very interesting. You go back to the previous Super Bowl that Tampa Bay had won, of John Gruden coming over from Oakland, and then of course coaching against them in the Super Bowl the next year. Just one of those interesting things you don't see it too many times in NFL history, where there's that big of a huge off-season move and it immediately pays off. There, ironically, we're sitting here on the cusp of a Super Bowl where it could happen again with Matthew Stafford and the Rams. But in terms of Brady going to Tampa, whether he was going to do it or not, the fact that he went in there, did it right away in a brand new circumstance, I think still managed to be jaw-dropping to a lot of people even after everything he'd done before.
Really what I view the Tampa as is he checked all the remaining boxes. If you're a Brady hater and want to link his success more to Bill Belichick, or the Patriot system or the organization, this really blew that argument out of the water, right? He not only goes to another team, he goes to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, coming off a 7-9 season, haven't been to the playoffs in 12 years, the worst winning percentage of any team in the 4 major professional team sports in their history. And he leads them in year 1, by the way, coming off or in the middle of a global pandemic where it wasn't even clear if he could really work out with his new teammates during the offseason to a Super Bowl. Now, I think Tampa had a much more talented roster than the 7-9 season the year before would indicate.
Right.
But it's just still, it's incredibly impressive. And like I said, it really just checks off all of those boxes. And seeing what he did in the playoffs, obviously, I thought the Super Bowl against Kansas City rightfully was more about their defense. I thought they played really well on offense too, right? They scored 31 points in 3 quarters. Would have been 38 if Ronald Jones hadn't been stuffed on 4th and goal from inside the 1-yard line. I thought that was about as good of a Super Bowl performance that we've seen in a long time by Tampa Bay. So I think Brady just checked off all those boxes. And to do it at the age of 43, right, with a team that had no real playoff experience by anybody on the active roster, that's what makes it different. I remember as a Patriot fan, I was devastated that Brady was leaving New England. As a Tom Brady fan, I was like, Tom, couldn't you have done this like 3 years ago? Because what happens if you go to Tampa and you're no good? Everyone's then going to make the argument if they want, oh, it really was all about Belichick, even though he was like 400 years old when he went to Tampa. But to make that move at the age of 43, it's really, we'll never see that again. That I can guarantee you, and have that level of success. And I'd say on an individual level, probably played even better this year after being in the system for a year. What the Tampa Bay's postseason in the 2020 season versus in this past season will really tell you is, at the end of the day, a lot of this is about health. If you're healthy, you have a chance. If you're not, you can have a better team. But if you're not healthy, it's going to be really hard to win. And to me, that's a big difference between their last 2 postseasons. It's just the level of health. They were incredibly healthy in 2020, won the Super Bowl. This year, they were anything but. And Brady still almost made it happen, but ended up losing, obviously, by 3.
Absolutely, yes. The beginning of the end for them really was Godwin going down, and then when Antonio Brown freaked out for the last of his times in Tampa Bay, that was probably the death knell because they just didn't have enough offensive weapons for him at that point. But this is one of these things where, Steve, in looking at this, and again, I know the deep student of history that you are, as well as me, and what Johnnie had said there about the chance for the final arc to go poorly. We remember these things with a lot of these players, and again, and I think it's very unfair that arguably, in my estimation, the greatest all-around baseball player of all time, Willie Mays, one of the things he's remembered for, falling down in the outfield in New York. There's that. There's Jordan in Washington. That's become shorthand for things, but really, that win in the Super Bowl over Mahomes' Chiefs, it's almost as though, and in the aforementioned, the top 75 players in pro basketball history, buy the book on Amazon, as was noted there, Jordan played in 2003 and LeBron played in 2003. They didn't overlap because Jordan retired from Washington for the last time just as LeBron was coming in. It's almost as though if Jordan had taken his team to the finals and faced LeBron in the finals, it's almost as if there'd been that kind of an overlap because Tom Brady, in terms of the history books, was able to get a decisive stamp on Patrick Mahomes. Whatever Mahomes does the rest of his career, there's always going to be that, plus the previous AFC Championship game loss to Brady. So what Brady was able to do on the back end there, if he wasn't already regarded as the greatest, it seems like what he did was put his level that much more out of reach for anybody that comes behind him, starting, of course, with Patrick Mahomes.
Well, and what I thought was most incredible 2 Super Bowls ago, as Johnnie was saying, in the middle of a pandemic, they didn't have any training camp. They didn't have any exhibition games. They kind of muddled through, I thought, the first half of the season. And I think Brady later said this was really their, OTAs or their exhibition season. And they really didn't start clicking. I think even in Week 10, they lost like 38-3 to the Saints. And then they ran the table. So I thought it was doubly impressive. I think part of the frustration for Brady, and I don't know if we'll ever really know why he decided to retire now, was even the year they won the Super Bowl, they were so undisciplined, the Bucs, compared to Patriots teams. And my view, even though, yes, to me, Brady gets the last laugh, he won the Super Bowl, and even though Belichick turned around the Patriots this year, he's playing with a rookie quarterback who people are, he's kind of like Tom Brady. Not exactly.
No.
And he threw 2 picks in his 3 biggest games of the year. And I'm not saying he's not going to be great. He might be. But you can't really say they're a lot. No, nobody is a lot like Tom Brady because you can't really fathom the inner, even when he was a young quarterback, even when he was at Michigan, that inner drive, that big chip on his shoulder or whatever. But I think part of the frustration here, and it happened this year too, you could see it last year, but as Johnnie said, they were not healthy. They lost Godwin. They lost AB. It seemed like 2 guys in their secondary were hurt all the time, although they were pretty healthy for the last game, the last couple of playoff games this year. But I think part of the problem is you could see Brady's frustration even last year when they would get so many stupid penalties, or guys are pulling off their helmet and throwing it on the ground, 15-yard penalty. I mean, just stupid penalties. And even though he says he loves Jensen, the center, he was a psycho. He got a bunch of penalties, stupid penalties. And I think that was so frustrating to Brady. And I know Johnnie has already looked at their schedule next year, and he said, man, they got a tough schedule next year. I'm not saying that went into the consideration, but I think they hadn't really connected. Look, whatever you think of Bruce Arians, he's no Bill Belichick, and it might have been more fun and more freewheeling. You weren't criticized all the time, although Arians took some stupid shots at Tom Brady last year, I thought, including at the beginning of the year. I thought they were stupid, but it was obviously more of a freewheeling kind of environment. So I think all of that, they had not corrected, in my view, their discipline problems this year. They didn't. And part of the loss was, they got far behind, but Brady did a Brady. Whatever happened on those final 2 plays with Matthew Stafford, now everybody views him to be Mr. Clutch, when they had a total breakdown in whether was it an all-out blitz or not. Why did Cooper Kupp just run by the safety? there are so many questions. Would they have won if they had played, overtime? None of that matters now because they lost. But I just think it was still a culmination of things. Yes, family. Yes, he said he wanted to play till 45. But I think looking forward, a lot of those problems were not corrected. They got like 8 free agents.
Right.
And I don't know that they could sign. The beauty of this year to me was they brought back all 22 starters and AB.
Right.
And I thought they could come back and repeat. But obviously it didn't work out that way. But I still think there were some chinks in the armor. And my view is, so Belichick's doing what he does this year, and he's thinking to himself, look what I did with this team if only I had Tom Brady. And I think Tom Brady's looking over his shoulder sometimes and saying, look at all these stupid pre-snap penalties. Look at all these stupid unsportsmanlike conduct penalties. This would have never happened in New England. So even though he does get the last laugh, I think they still could have used each other. Not that he was going to stay 2 years with the Patriots and win, but just that they still kind of, in my view, needed each other. Although, again, Brady won the Super Bowl without Belichick.
That is true. He was able to do that, no question about it. Okay, so we'll get some final thoughts from you guys on the subject here. We've gone through, I think, very comprehensively, and I'm very proud to be able to say that with all the points that everybody has hit thus far. So I'll start with you, Johnny. Anything we didn't get to yet as far as your thoughts on the career of Tom Brady and his legacy?
Yeah, just a couple final thoughts. It's really difficult to remember a guy who finished his career playing at such an elite level. I mean, you alluded to earlier, Rick, Jordan, had he stayed retired, we would say that about him, but obviously he came back with the Wizards. Jim Brown comes to mind, who left the game as far and away the best player in the game. Of course, Tom Brady is 44 years old, and he just led the league in passing touchdowns, passing yards, completions. Nobody relies on their quarterback to throw the ball more in football than the Buccaneers do with Brady. So it's really incredible that he's leading the game on top, even though he didn't go out with a Super Bowl win. He's leading the game on top. My real last thoughts besides that are, 20 full seasons as a starter in the NFL, because his rookie year in 2008 when he was injured, excluding those 2 years. He goes to the Super Bowl half the amount of time. He goes to the 10 Super Bowls on average every other year, and he wins 7 Super Bowls, more than 1 in every 3 tries. In the salary cap era, it's hard to imagine. That's never going to be done again. And of course, he leaves the game at the time of his retirement with more Super Bowl victories than any franchise in the NFL. So I don't think there can be any doubt. I know maybe supporters of Mr. Russell would disagree with this, but to me, I think he's the greatest winner considering the difficulties in the NFL. Far and away the greatest winner in the history of team sports. And I think he's right up there with Jordan, Gretzky, or Babe Ruth on sort of that pantheon of American team sports athletes.
Yeah, I can't find anything to disagree with in what you said there. Final thoughts, Steve? Anything we didn't get to yet?
Yeah, just a few numbers. 243 regular season wins. Nobody has more than 186. 35 and 12 in the playoffs. I mean, just, again, these are all like video game numbers. Most touchdowns. Throws for over 5,000 yards as a 44-year-old. Again, interesting to me, 81 games in his 40s versus 96 games in his 20s. He throws more touchdown passes. He throws for more yards. His quarterback rating was 10 points higher than it was in his 20s. I mean, just unfathomable stuff because nobody's done in his 40s, and I don't think anybody ever will what he does. What he's done in his 40s, nobody will ever duplicate that. I do have one very weird stat that I'm going to throw out there for my son. We've talked often about the Brady not catching that pass against the Eagles, and I thought it was thrown too far. It went off his fingertips. I just want you both to know, in an obscure stat that you will never hear anywhere else ever, Brady in his career was thrown to 3 times. He caught all 3 passes for a total of 65 yards. So he was the perfect pass catcher until that Super Bowl drop, I guess.
Wow.
That hit him in the fingertips. But once again, being more serious, the greatest quarterback ever, the pantheon that Johnnie named, I totally agree. He did Ruthian stuff in football. I totally agree with that as well. And given the salary cap era, I don't think you can see anybody who will come close to this. And I now include Patrick Mahomes after losing to him last year, losing to him in that AFC Championship game. and losing last week, I think that doesn't bode well because I don't know how long you can keep those teams together. And again, I don't think anybody's going to challenge Brady. You might tell me there are more talented quarterbacks, but you won't have a combination of skill, effort, chip on your shoulder, mental toughness, and the ability to look out over a defense and say, yeah, I know what they're going to do before the ball's even snapped. That's a skill. Peyton Manning did have that skill, but that's a skill that takes years and years and years to figure out. And I just don't think anybody's going to come close to him. And my son will be here 30, 40, 50 years from now to talk about it.
Well, exactly. And this is a thing where the one thing that you can say that will set any athlete apart is when you say, nobody will ever have a career quite like his again. I can't really, you can count on one hand the number of players presently active in sports where you could say that about them and probably have a couple fingers left over. The one thing I will say, I'll end this on a circle of life kind of a note, as his career is ending, and maybe this is a little convenient on my part as I talk about the honorary Ohio Bobcat Joe Burrow, but if anybody is starting their career at a point where they could make a run, come back and see, because certainly the Bengals have a very incomplete team around him, especially offensive line and defensively, and they've made it to the Super Bowl largely on the back of him. Some opportunistic play defensively. The front four is really good. The wide receivers, of course, are outstanding. But if there's anybody that's going to make a run, I don't think it's Patrick Mahomes at this point as much as it is Joe Burrow. But we'll have to see. Gentlemen, a real pleasure having both of you on. FDH Lounge dignitary Steve Kallas and one of his co-hosts from Kallas Remarks, Johnnie Kallas. I appreciate both of you guys being here so much. Thank you, and thank you everybody for joining us for our retrospective on the career of Tom Brady.